right. Hey, today we are beginning our talk about the weather. And with the weather, it's a very, very complex idea of predicting and forecasting weather. And so we're going to talk about some of the basic components we need to know about before we can really understand what's going on when we say, what is the weather? And the very first thing we need to talk about are air masses. And an air mass is just a big group of air, and throughout that entire mass of air, it all has very similar characteristics. And the two characteristics we're talking about are temperature and moisture. And an air mass gets those characteristics from where they form. So if an air mass forms over land, it's going to be very dry, compared to one that forms over the ocean, which will be a moist air mass. Very similar idea. An air mass that forms near the equator is going to be very warm, and one that forms in the middle of Canada will be very cold. So they get their characteristics based on where they form. And this is important because when these two air masses collide, that's where we get weather. And depending on what those air masses are and how different their characteristics are, that's really going to determine the severity of the weather we get. So looking at how we name these air masses, we use a combination of lowercase letters and capital letters. You're going to find a table, a chart in your notes, and please make sure you fill that in. The lowercase letters are going to represent our moisture levels. So a lowercase c represents continental, and what it really means is a dry air mass. And lowercase m, that'll mean maritime, and maritime's dealing with the water, so that's going to be a moist air mass. And we combine one of those lowercase letters with one of our capital letters to kind of finish off the air mass. So it could be combined with a capital T, which means tropical, which would mean a warm air mass. P would represent polar, and that would be cold. And then A would be Arctic air masses, and those are very rare and they're very cold. Maybe you've seen a globe before. At the very top has that dotted line that's labeled the Arctic Circle. Technically, an Arctic air mass comes from within the Arctic Circle. So I know sometimes here in Michigan, the people on the TV are saying, oh, there's an Arctic air mass heading right for Michigan. They don't really mean an Arctic air mass. That rarely ever gets down to our latitude. It's just a colder than normal polar air mass. And so you have a couple examples in your notes, so please make sure you're writing down both what we would call this air mass and also its characteristics, just as some practice. And when we read these letters, we don't say, oh, there's an MT air mass. We don't say it like that. When you see MT, you should say maritime tropical. And so that's our first example, the MT, maritime tropical air mass. We also have to know the characteristics, and maritime tropical would be forming over water somewhere near the equator, so it's going to have high moisture and be very warm. CP, that's continental polar. That would be forming over land, someplace that's cold, so it would be a cold, dry air mass. And then a CA would be continental Arctic. That's what we would say when we see those letters. And the characteristics there, again, are dry and this time just very cold. And that's where we're going to wrap it up for air masses. Again, starting very basic, but you're going to see these air masses come into play when we start talking about things like fronts and also severe weather. So make sure you're taking some good notes and asking questions, and I'll see you soon.